But to make that simple, I just store all the pieces in grid pieces, and then whenever I need to make that change, I can find them all by just iterating over this table and looking at each piece. It's a very rudimentary way of doing things. It's kind of a hack, but it works, and it's easy. Last drop is, I'll explain in a moment, but it's basically a variable that tells me what kind of thing I just dropped onto the board, and I'll go into that a little bit more. DTG. Details tray. So another hacky thing that I kind of do here, which totally works for this, but is that every time you touch one of these elements, I redraw the contents of this tray. So everything that's drawn here, I destroy it, and then I redraw it based on the kind of block that exists at that grid. So these grids are they're basic. They're called none grids. They have nothing at them. This grid is a none grid. This grid is a start grid, and a start grid doesn't have anything fancy about it. But if I were to drag a turret on here, a turret grid or a rocket turret has everything that a regular grid has, but it's also got some additional settings. And so I purge the contents of this tray, this little area here, and then I redraw the controls that I need that are specific to this. Kind of hacky, it's kind of wasteful, but you're doing it in the simulator, so it's really fast, and it's an easy thing to implement. It's very easy to understand how it works. So instead of trying to do some like tricky programming, I just do straightforward programming.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to say it seems like it may not win you any developer
awards. Not going to win me any coding awards.
Yeah.
But you know what? I got it done in half an hour versus trying to figure it out and go, okay, how can I make this thing intelligent and make sure everything's lined up and moved around? Forget about it.
And somebody can look at it and get it right without getting lost on.
Yeah, exactly. That's the whole goal here. I mean, this editor currently is about 1,000 lines long, but at this point, adding new elements only adds like 20 or 30 lines of code per new element. So as the editor evolves and has more and more things you can edit, it doesn't get a lot longer. What else? Just quick. I'm trying to do this quickly here. So draw image is it's a lookup table that I use. I'll explain in a minute, but it lets me have one graphic for the piece. So like these, you can see are their tracks, but when I drag them on here, they're represented by something that looks different. So the draw image is my cheat for saying when I drag this horizontal path thing on here, go and look up the image that I'm supposed to draw on the grid and use that image instead of the one that's on the tray. So I got an image for the tray and I got an image for the grid, and sometimes they're the same, like these are the same. Sometimes they're different. These are different. First grid is just a flag. So when I draw, it's not a flag. What it is a variable where when I draw the first grid, I store that grid reference in there, and then I know that when I reload, just go highlight the first grid. It's another hacky thing I did to go, okay, that was the first one I created. It's going to be the first one. Highlight it. Everybody else, blue with a red outline. All right, some localizations, just shortcuts to make things shorter when I'm typing and make them run faster. The first public method is the destroy method, and the second and only other public method or function is the create, which doesn't take a level number anymore. Create calls destroy, and then it creates a bunch of display groups to act as layers. Talked about this, so underlay, content, and overlay. Underlay being on the bottom, overlay being on the top, and content being in the middle. I draw a background, which is just this nice blue here. And then I call my private functions to draw the edit grid, draw the piece tray, which is at the bottom here, and to draw the details tray, my made-up name for it, which is this square region over here, rectangular region in the upper right. Then I call the restore function, and the restore function's job is to go look and see if there was a previously edited file and to load it up and draw it on the screen. If not, it does nothing. And at that point, I flip the flag that says, okay, now saves are enabled. And the reason I did this is because the restore function is calling a bunch of other functions to draw things on the screen. And the way I wrote those functions is as you progress through and you did, so like you drew something, you made a change, it will save. So that it's doing constant saves to the disk. And so what I didn't want to do was, that's catch-22. You want to restore, but you don't want to do any saves during the store because you'll wipe out the file that you just loaded from. Now, it probably wouldn't do anything because the file would already be in memory, but it would be a waste of CPU bandwidth and disk bandwidth. So I have a flag that basically says, whatever you want to do, don't do any saves. So up until this point, we're not allowing saves. I just flip the switch and say, okay, anything I do now, you can save it. And then after that, all I do is I force the tray to refresh so that it's displaying the details for the first grid, which is the one that's in the upper corner, the first one I created. And then that makes sure that it displays the details and settings that are currently saved for that grid. All right, so at this point, I'm not going to actually walk through all of the code because there's no way we can get through 1,000 lines of code. Yeah, let me see if there's anything interesting in here that I can point out.
But I can see that you've got things well labeled, like each of the function names seem to be self-documenting. Makes sense, right?
Yeah, it's got minimal documentation, but the documentation in there should lead people very clearly along the path. So I will point out, remember how I said the draw image business where you can have a different image? That part is right here. So as I create the tray buttons, I say, okay, the start one uses this image here, but if I wanted to, I could change the draw image for start to something else. Let's say, just for fun, let's change it to the round piece. This doesn't make any sense, but just to demonstrate the concept. So right now, when I do this, I get these little guys. Let me clear it. And then I'll reload with the changes I just saved. Now when I drag and drop a guy, I get a round piece. So that was changing the draw image for a start object. So a start object will now use a round picture on the grid, which I don't really want, just wanted to demonstrate it. So let's put that back, reload, and now we got a little goofy guy. Yeah. So one of the things that I don't like doing hand calculations all the time. So when I want to lay these things out, basically they're going to be laid out in a column and a grid format. And so I pre-calculated the Y position of the rows, but then I needed some way to calculate the column position. So column 1, column 2, column 3. So you will see that I have these little functions here called column 2, column 3. And these are a shortcut function that I wrote above. Let me expand this. Let me find it. Here it is. It's a little shortcut function that I wrote that basically looks at the position of the tray on the screen and says, okay, column 1 relative to this tray and how wide it is and all that, it's going to be here. Column 2 here. And that way I don't have to calculate the X positions. I just say, I want this button to be in column 2. But whatever X position that is, just return it to me. So it's a shortcut function. So that's sort of like a tip, and just so people understand what's going on here in the code. And that's it. That's pretty much it for the drawing the editor, the tray at the bottom. Then we have a small function that draws a details tray, which initially it has nothing in it. So it's just the outline and a couple of shortcut functions like the column thing to get an X position relative to the tray.